Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in the East. A showdown in Texas over that state's voting restriction law, in the wake of zero evidence of systematic fraud in Texas, is putting more pressure on the White House as the president prepares to deliver remarks on voting rights tomorrow. Nothing less than Biden's full-throated support for blowing up the filibuster, if that's what it takes to pass federal voting rights legislation, is sought by Democratic activists on the front lines of the GOP-led war on voting rights. If Biden fails to call for extraordinary measures to protect the right to vote, Beto O'Rourke warns that what is happening in Texas will become the new normal in Texas, Florida, and Georgia as well.
Whatever you see on paper today is likely going to become much worse as it goes into conference committee and other provisions are added to it. So we need to stop this effort to change or tamper our elections now before it goes any further. And then ultimately we need the United States Senate to act. The only way that you stop voter suppression in Texas and Georgia and Florida and in so many other parts of the country is by having federal intervention to protect the right to vote.
The New York Times is reporting that the president is expected to step up his public profile on the issue of voting rights. But the Times is signaling that it may, at this point, simply be window dressing. They report this, quote, President Biden is expected to put his political muscle behind the issue in a speech in Philadelphia on Tuesday. But in Congress, Democratic senators have been unable to move voting and election bills that would address what many of them call a fundamental attack on American democracy that could lock in a new era of Republican minority rule. And in the courts, attacks on voting restrictions face an increasingly hostile judiciary and narrowing legal options. There is extreme peril in the Democratic Party's current frame on this issue. The Democratic construct politically is that pushing moderates to abandon the filibuster is more dicey than allowing 389 voting restrictions to move through 48 state houses. Democrats are wrong. Spend 5 minutes watching Fox News, and you will see that Republicans aren't even pretending anymore that these laws are really about election fraud or election integrity. That's because lifelong Republicans like Chris Krebs have already said out loud and on the record that 2020 was the most secure election in our country's history. And Bill Barr looked high and low and did not find any evidence of widespread voter fraud. So at this point, Democrats could be as complicit as Republicans if they rely on the same old tactics for a whole new kind of war against GOP disinformation and a real slide toward anti-democratic measures. Here's Beto O'Rourke's call to action.
An elections bill that is premised on a lie that there is widespread fraud in our elections, even though there is not. A solution in search of a problem that's going to disproportionately hurt and harm some Texans more than others. And for those who support democracy, the Democrats in this room, I encourage you to fight with all you have. Do whatever it takes to make sure that we preserve the right to vote in the state of Texas.
In Texas at this hour, that fight is not over. It's being revived once again by Democrats there. NBC News can report this, quote, at least 58 Democratic members of the State House of Representatives are expected to bolt from Austin today in an effort to block the measures from advancing. A source familiar with their plans tells NBC News the unusual move would paralyze the chamber, stopping business until the lawmakers return to town or until the session ends. The majority of the members plan to fly to Washington, D.C. on 2 private jets chartered for the occasion and use the time there to rally support for federal voting legislation. The Texas Democrats fighting back in the face of Republicans' very successful voter suppression drive is where we start again today. Former RNC chairman and MSNBC political analyst Michael Steele is here. Also joining us, Nick Corsinini, New York Times domestic correspondent, all over this story for us. And former Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, now an MSNBC political analyst, joins us. Nick, I know you've been reporting out this move by Texas legislators. Let me play someone who's been on this program a couple of times now. This is State Representative Crockett on the way to the airport. Let me play this. This is her talking about the goal with his second trip to the Capitol.
So, the goal is to apply more pressure this time. We moved the needle last time, and it wasn't the entire delegation. We should have the majority of the delegation there in D.C. with us. So the goal is going to be to say, listen, we have done everything that we could. We're having to leave our families now for almost the entire 30 days to avoid dealing with this. We're having to live outside of the state just to avoid law enforcement being able to get us. So we need y'all to do your part.
So, Nick, tell me the latest on the story. Do they have enough Democrats who have fled the state, and have they all committed to staying outside of the state until the session ends?
Well, yeah, as we speak, we're probably a few, minutes away from them actually departing Texas. They haven't done so yet, but there are about 60 House members, all from the Democratic caucus, who are about to take off and leave. And that would be enough over the 51 threshold to prevent a quorum and prevent the state house and the legislature from progressing on any laws. Now, there were a few other laws. There was one looking to restrict transgender student athletes' behavior. There was one looking to take action against social media, perceived censorship that, is probably not exactly there. But the main reason that they're leaving is because of this voting bill. And if you over the weekend, there were marathon hearings where the public came almost universally against these bills. They went overnight. Hundreds of people from Texas came to speak out against these bills. And they're almost the same bills that, were brought up earlier this year in May. And what you saw was efforts to both restrict new voting that had been brought out in 2020 to allow for drive-through voting and 24-hour voting. Those are going to be banned. And then kind of broader restrictions like adding new ID requirements to voting by mail and expanding the authority and autonomy of partisan poll watchers. So Democrats just saw the same thing kind of come at them. Despite their pleas, despite their pledges to bring new amendments, it just looked like this was going to be swiftly marched through the state legislature. So this appeared to be the last option that at least House Democrats thought they had.
Michael Steele, let me play you more of State Representative Jasmine Crockett. And this is what she's asking Washington Democrats, the president, and the Democratic-controlled United States Senate to do.
I want him to hear our cries and hear how significant this is and how much we need him. So for me, it's going to be more so of an ask for him to push as hard as he can. This filibuster we have to do away with it, because once again, it's Republicans being allowed to be obstructionists.
So, Michael Steele, this is now at President Biden's doorstep. What do you make of this newly aggressive move by Texas Democrats, in a vast minority there, but refusing to take this?
Would that aggression be a contagion within the Democratic Party? You'd be in a very different space right now. I just don't look. I understand the politics probably too well in many respects. What I don't understand is why there doesn't seem to be a response to minority rule. Mitch McConnell is acting as if he is still the Speaker or the Majority Leader of the Senate. Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans in the House feel that they've got, the margin is close enough that, he can de facto gum the works up there. Use the system against itself. And that's what these legislators are doing in Texas. They're using the system against itself. They are saying, okay, we are willing to get on the road and fly to another part of the country to press the case for voting rights. So if I'm the Biden administration at this point, what I have to take from that in this speech tomorrow is a declaration to engage the Republicans on that ground and tell the American people why. Nothing else. There's not another legislative bill in the House or the Senate that can get passed and has the kind of support of the American people if you don't fundamentally deal with the right to vote. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you pass an infrastructure bill. It doesn't matter if you pass all these other bills, because back at home, right, those citizens are watching their constitutional right, not your constitutional right to have a pothole filled, but your constitutional right to have a vote stripped away systematically by the minority party. And you either are going to step up and push up against that and shut it down, or you're not. And that's what the Texas legislators, the Democratic legislators, are saying right now by this move to Washington is like, y'all need to shut this down now. We're doing our part.